So, welcome to another POFcast. I'm Rob Lancaster.
And I'm Minagano Kape.
And I'm David Vincent.
We're back after a short hiatus. And to begin with, the POFcasts moving forward, we're going to start with a brief reflection on something that's made us think of peace in the time since the previous POFcast. So, we're going to start with Minagano.
Well, interesting enough, this week I've been looking at a lot of mangoes in Juba. It's a mango season in Juba and also most parts of South Sudan. And then I realized we have mangoes in abundance and communities cannot make use of it in a way that can earn them profits and a living. I understand in some areas in South Sudan, the mangoes actually rot because they cannot eat all of them during the season and they cannot add value into the mangoes to give them profit and make the communities resilient. So I'm just imagining if we have peace, how much potential we have as a country to make use of things such as mango. Yeah.
Yes, so I think 3 weeks ago I was in Nairobi, I think, 2 weeks now. So just before I left, it was at the back of the time when Dr. Riek was arrested or house arrest. And there were a lot of military presence. And of course, with the military presence gives you a different meaning to what peace is. So I left when all the roads, there was a lot of roadblocks and then there were presence of military everywhere. And then last week coming back, it was quite nice to see the streets were cleared off of the military and people just going back to their own life, doing whatever they want to do, which is, for me, I see that as a quick sign of peace. So if someone comes in, it's not total peace, but at least on the streets, you can see that's a sign of calmness.
Back to normal traffic jams.
Yes, absolutely.
So for me, I was sick earlier this week, and one of my favorite feelings in the world is that sort of moment as you're getting properly better after being sick, and the body kind of feels somewhat cleansed, and after the internal war between whatever virus or bacteria or whatever. So it's nice to be doing this podcast, not feeling like something's hit me on the head. So we'll continue reflections on peace in upcoming podcasts. But today, now in terms of the theme, we're going to look at sustainability. So sustainability is a word that donors love incorporating into calls for proposals, into log frames. You have to have your sustainability strategy and so on and so forth. But for all the talk of sustainability, here we are in South Sudan, however many years, 10 years plus since independence, 20 years since the CPA, 40 years plus since Operation Lifeline Sudan started. So what does sustainability actually mean? And what can we sort of think about it in terms of driving that agenda forward in a meaningful sense? But let's start with what it means. What does it mean? Sustainability. It's talked about a lot.
Yeah, so for me, I was thinking about the sustainability in terms of whatever that we are doing or whatever that is being done. At the end of that, what happens next?
Mm-hmm.
If it's an activity, at the end of the activity, let's say the activity is 3 months, what happens after the activity? So that's where we talk a lot about sustainability. In ideal world, you wanted whatever that you're doing to continue after the end of whatever that you're doing. So that's how we look at it as a sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. I think it's such a loaded term. It more or less become more like a buzzword, right? Because all the time, sustainability approach and all that. I would think of it as similar to what David said, is that interventions of NGOs or intervention of every agency that comes to the community should not end by the time they're leaving the community. How can it continue beyond their presence within this community, beyond the end of a specific activity or a specific project? How can the communities run with it? So, yeah.
And the current scenario, how would you describe the current scenario in terms of sustainability of activities, interventions, programs, projects in South Sudan?
I would say it's the current scenario is really it's at the worst because a lot of things rotates uh, around the NGOs in particular. The communities, not that the communities do not do things by themselves, they do, but when the moment that an NGO steps in, there is a massive expectation that they are coming with additional resources that will enable whatever that intervention is to continue. And they look at it as an intervention that is coming from, it's an external intervention rather than they actually own it. So at the moment, I think a lot of dependency has been laid just based on how we operate as whether it's an international or UN, all the agencies as well.
Yeah, I would say the pulling away of USA projects has revealed a lot of issues around sustainability or sustainable approach because the moment they have left, we are hearing of a lot of stories of how, especially for example in the health sectors, how different areas within South Sudan is facing a lot of challenges in terms of maintaining the interventions that has been established by these different NGOs that have been operating in these different areas. There's a financial part of it, but also the communities, because some of the projects are not really embedded within the local structures. So it ends by the time the project ends. So there's no traces really for some of the interventions, which is it's such a pity.
So let's just take a step back for a moment. If we go back many years, and even when you were growing up during the war and so forth, there was Operation Lifeline Sudan, but there was also a lot of community ownership, let's say, of what was going on with a lot of other complexities at the same time, for sure. But back then, what was the scenario back then in terms of community ownership, in terms of how everything unfolded on the ground?
There was some sort of enthusiasm, or let's say the unity around what was happening during the war, and the willingness of the communities to come out openly to support the by then the rebel groups by providing them with all the services, whether it's food or what. So all that was being packaged together, and the community willingly would contribute their part without being pushed for it at all. So when we talk of sustainability back then, the community saw the need to be able to identify their role in on how to move forward. Even traditionally, when people was really looking at farming, we didn't have any. There was no particular food distribution or anything like that, so people depended entirely on farming. And it's quite important that during the harvesting time, people or the household will decide to keep some portion and say this is the seed for the next season. That's mean they are looking at the sustainability on whatever the plan is that they are looking at moving forward. So all those things were there. It's all there. But something happened that we lost it.
Hmm. And so, what happened? I mean, how have we got to this point today that in a lot of the conversations we're having now, even when we're talking about community co-contribution or government's role, even there's still this residual expectation that as long as there's an NGO sector, they bear the primary responsibility.
Well, I will not speak much about the wartime, but what I have seen after South Sudan became an independent nation, I think there was a lot of support that came into the country, right? And the ways most of these interventions are designed, because there was a lot of money available, NGOs were willing to do everything, and there was little proactiveness in terms of asking the communities to bring in their contribution. And and I think looking at what is happening now, the communities have become so much dependent, and in some cases, I would say even entitled
Yeah.
to a point where they will tell you, but this is an NGO money. You're an NGO. Why are you asking us to contribute? So I think there's a new way of thinking that has been introduced by the previous way of work, that even now, as we are thinking about sustainability and how to push the agenda, we tend to face challenges within the communities that we are working with, because they have worked differently with other agencies in the past and they expect that to continue, which is very difficult at this point of time where there's very limited resources to put into some of these interventions that we are working on.
And I think, yeah, you are right, Minagano. Yeah, during the Operation Lifeline Sudan back then, there was much being pumped into South Sudan. But I don't think there is a lot of thoughts that has been put into during the design of these activities. Especially, let's move it forward to 2005 after the peace. I think a lot of NGOs were pouring in, but there was not a lot of thinking as to how we can sustain what being offered to the community. I wish back then, if a conversation about sustainability was initiated at the time, I think we would be we would be at a different place at the moment. Unfortunately, what there is this culture of dependency that was laid as part of what was being offered, and since that no one has questioned it, it's years later that's when now you see donors begin to see there is a question. You have to address the question of sustainability in your project. But if I wish that was done back then, we would be in a better place.
Yeah. And I think also this bring in the element of when do we begin to talk about sustainability when we are designing or implementing a project, right? I realize in most cases, people tend to start talking about sustainability plan when the project is coming to an end. And then it's almost like they are reminded, wait, we're ending in this year, what can we do? So these are conversations that needs to start from the beginning, from the design process. When you go to the community to start a project, this should be at the initial stages of the project so that the community understand that this is not here to stay forever. At some point, they need to pick it up. And I remember we've started having this conversation with some of our teams, Huang with the Nanal establishment project. We were telling them we have to start thinking about it now. What's the plan beyond the establishment of the centers? So I think we need to really be keen on having this conversation from the onset.
And if I can just add quickly, Rob, I think the problem has happened. I think it's so, even the government at the moment, whether it's a state or county or whatever level of the government, they're shifting their own responsibilities to international organization or UN, or it's just very, as a South Sudanese, I feel very ashamed to see that the services that the government was meant to be delivering is being delivered by the organization. And that's also an issue, because we want to push the government to take up the role to support or provide the services that are needed. But now you would even see government officials or government bodies or entities are asking women for support. That's just not right.
So there are different levels to it as well. So, for example, under POF, we have this sort of central component to the program, which is that the NGOs that we're supporting to at present, by the end of the program, they're in a position to receive direct funding from, let's say, FCDO or whichever other donors in substantial volume. So that's fine in one arm of a sustainability strategy. But then if there's much less money in general and resources available, that's going to be no good, because they're in a position to sort of satisfy all those compliance requirements potentially if all goes well. But then no resources actually to draw on in the current environment, or far more limited resources to draw on in the current environment. So in that sense, what would you say about where expectation is in a broader sense? So you talked about the expectations and maybe sometimes a sense of entitlement in communities, but is the whole level of resourcing just beyond what can realistically be sustained? Like we've got the UN system, all the agencies, the salaries that come with that, the economy and the way it gets distorted because of all that injection of money, even in the Juba real estate market, let's say, on top of other elements that are distorting it that we won't go into. But yeah, what else needs to change in terms of where our expectations are set and what is realistic at the end of the day? Because even these NGOs, just to take the couple that we're supporting, in the current landscape, it'll be very hard for them to survive, even if they're getting that direct funding with the likely volume of that funding moving on from end of 2026, the way things are looking currently.
I think we have to have more conversation about sustainability. Uh, I'm sure even within the life of POF, we've had this conversation, but we've never gone so vigorously. And we could point on a particular example, in Lake State, for example. But I just wanted to mention one quick thing. It's a very personal story. When I went to Australia, and after I've reunited with my family, then there was an expectation that I would be supporting them financially, right? So it reached a point where I was not.
Your family back in South Sudan.
In South Sudan.
Yeah.
So then it reached a point where I was juggling studies and many other things plus supporting them. So I had to cut back from work, which means that I won't be supporting them as I used to be when we first met. Then very quickly, I remember by then my dad was alive. So we had a conversation with my dad, and I told Dad, look, I think from this month and this month, I will be focused on studies. I won't be supporting you as much as I was doing initially. And so at the end of the line, he just kept quiet and he said, David, before we knew where you were and before you came into our life, we were living. Life was moving on. So you go do your thing and we will move on. Why I'm saying this, I feel like this is South Sudanese with the resilience. I think this is what would happen naturally. Of course, people will suffer, and the shift has started to come in, especially when the USAID, their cuts came in. There was a lot of conversation. What's going to happen now? So I feel by default, we are now forced to speak about sustainability, and the communities now begin to realize, okay, this support will end one day. So it's quite interesting to see how by default, by one action by Trump, and then we are all talking about sustainability now.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think when I'm reflecting on our work as POF and also the partners that we're working with, like Peace Canal, I think we've been trying to have these conversations with the communities that we're working with. For example, in Lake State, we are really trying to work with existing local structures. And to me, I think this is one way to push the agenda of sustainability so that these structures that have been within the community, if we're not there, and they understand and see the benefit of the work that we've been doing with them, they can be able to find ways to carry it on. And I think one reason, interesting example that stuck with me is the dissemination of the Pakam Luangjang dialogue resolution between Rumbek North and Tonj East. The community literally say they decided to walk from Tonj East to Maper because they wanted to reach all the villages that they felt was important to pass the messages of peace to. And they went even further to say that, yes, we are asking the partners and the government to help us clear this road. But if they cannot, we're willing to contribute our cows to support the clearing of this road. To me, I find this as a very interesting example of local ownership, which will in turn lead to a long-term sustainability of the different efforts that we do.
So it's interesting that came up, and I was interested in reading that in the blog you wrote about that whole process, because by contrast, because that's just one localized agenda for peace, let's say, on that cross-border issue. But taking it back to the Dinka Agar side and the discussion we were having with them on the cattle migration, we were looking at what could be the community co-contribution to the cattle migration process and the cattle migration conference, all of which they say have to happen every year, have to happen. Like it's that important. And if you were to look, I reckon, conservatively at the value of cattle stock in that area, it would be something like roughly $400 million, right? And when we asked the question, they're like, oh yeah, maybe our section could contribute a goat or and a couple of chickens, maybe one bull, and so on. So for me, that's really striking that that would even the mindset is such that that's seen as like a level of generosity to a process that David themselves are at least saying to us is super critical for managing their conflicts. So I don't know if you have any sense of what it was about that particular initiative that elicited this sense of ownership from the community, or even David on the side of Rumbek. We have that feeling that the grassroots peace community do own the process, and increasingly there's some more issues on the Jonglei side, but where is the disconnect between the ownership and not seeing the link with what investment or sort of capital they do have that they could be potentially investing in it?
Initially, and I'll link it back. Initially, if usually the chiefs, whether it's paramount chief or the chiefs in different level, when something is required, usually they step forward
Mm.
and resolve it. Let's say if a visitor comes, then the chiefs will provide a goat or a chicken. That was quite clear. But often the chief also would have extra, because when they are settling all the disputes, there are fines and all that. All those fines comes to the chief, because it's their role now to handle things like this when it comes to community contribution towards anything. So we have lost that now, So the chiefs now are no longer gaining. They no longer have the extras that they used to have in the past, and so when it's come to contribution to anything, there's a bit of a struggle as to who would be able to do that. By default, back then, there was no question about it. The chief would provide it because the community knows that he has extra. So this conversation, this is where we've got to stuck a little bit, and we need to get back to that sort of a culture once again, on how we can push that forward. But we do need to look at that. So the attitude has to change. As the example you gave earlier on the 4 million, let's say, for example, they know they have it. But then we need to create a system within the community to know, so that they are aware. Today, it's my family that is contributing. Next time, it's your family. Like, there have to be some sort of a system that we need to negotiate with the community around that. In the past, yes, we know the chief will take care of that, but now things have changed. So this is quite where we need to go there. But the other challenge that we need to look at as we move forward, or as we continue with this discussion, is that we, as agencies, it's not only that POF have to have this conversation, it has to be across all the agencies as well. Otherwise, if POF comes in and say, let's talk about cost sharing activities, implement that approach, they will be like, but then, another agency is doing something different, not you. So this conversation, we need to pull it back one more step, to have across all the agencies that this is the approach, and the community will get it quite quickly.
Anything to add to that?
As you're talking, I'm just reflecting on the roles of the chiefs and how it has changed over the years. And maybe this is a topic for another day. But then, yeah, I think it in one way or the other, it also affects the way we work and who we can work with. So I think we also need to rethink, why is it that the chiefs are not getting the extra now? Have people moved away from the culture, or is it that people don't have cattle anymore to give extras? So I think these are also other dimensions of this conversation that we need to understand. But it's also the value of cattle. What does it mean to these communities? You can say it's worth millions of dollars, but for them, they don't see it that way.
Yeah.
So they would rather have their beautiful cow, but not to sell it to get money. So I think this is also a long-term mindset change that will come slowly as we work with the communities. I think I was reading somewhere 2 days ago that someone bought a bull at $10,000. I was like,
Wandel.
yes, for a marriage, sort of a thing that completely shocked me. So you can imagine. So the value of cattle is viewed really differently as versus money.
Yeah.
So I guess we need to paint a picture that if peace is important, then peace cost. And so you have to. So this is the conversation we are not having. You're not having that conversation enough within the community to say what is important. And if it's important, as you say, this is important, then you would be able to put your time, your resources on it. And then we sort of move towards that.
But I think also beyond the conversation, when they begin to feel the peace dividends, I feel like there's a way they will start to make this change, right? And I'll take us back to the Pakan Lonjan example of them going to a point where they're saying we're willing to give this number of cows to clear this road if the government cannot. I think that came from the fact that after that, the main dialogue that happened between them last year, there was few efforts where people were able to cross and use the roads that were never used before. The communities were able to make these efforts, and communities in Tonj East, for example, they're able to come up to Rumbek and do their businesses so they can see some of the benefits that come with this peace effort. And I think that is maybe an incentive that has pushed them to say, yes, we're willing to do this if it would result to maintenance of the relative peace that we're able to experience in this short period of time.
Yeah, and maybe that experiential thing is important. That it's for some communities been so long since having the experience of owning a livelihood initiative or any initiative and feeling the benefits of that and the empowerment that comes from that. Even earlier today, when we were discussing the design of some livelihoods pilots around that, one of the points that was made in terms of how it contributes to the wider change is that sense of confidence that it builds. That actually we can through our own kind of initiative and off our own back, drive these things forward. So creating more of those experiences that can then be leveraged as much as possible. So what does this mean for how we, say as POF or as a comparable program or other agencies, what do we need to be thinking about in light of all of this? And where do we need to be starting to shift the approach? David, referred to the fact that we need to have, at least to some extent, common approaches across agencies. Otherwise, you just get this confusion that reigns. But what are the key points moving forward?
I think it comes to the design process of any intervention. Now that we need to embed the sustainability plan into it. And if we are co-designing activities together with the community, then that conversation begins earlier on, straight away. And one thing I like about our approach at the moment, we are shifting towards strengthening the local governance of the community governance structures. When we strengthen these structures, then they become part of the design of any intervention. And already then we talk about the sustainability as we move forward. And we hope that this conversation can go even wider or more broader. And now, within our approach, we are talking about that, for example, we are now working towards getting Peace Canal to develop their community contribution strategy, steps that can be used. So that's really quite great. Once that strategy is launched, then it will enable a certain level of conversation with the community as well. But as I still feel that what is quite important is how do we bring the government along as part of this conversation? Because they play a very key role. What we haven't worked out is our strategy in engaging the government. Of course, there is the plan of that Europe has already shared what had happened in Jonglei already in terms of the memorandum of understanding that we have between the let's say the partners and the government, so that we can begin to have to formalize this discussion. It will be a struggle, but I think it will get there eventually. I'm very relating to the story of my father. I feel like the communities are very resilient, that eventually they will pick it up and say, okay, this is the reality. We need to change our attitudes in terms of if we want peace or we want anything, we have to put in what is your stake in it, and immediately.
Yeah, I agree with what David said. I think really we need to think in a long-term approach, and also we need to have an exit strategy at the back of our minds from the beginning, from the design process. And yeah, the role of government is quite important. And I think for for a very long time we have managed to also build relationship with the local government institutions who really play a big role in terms of working directly with some of these local structures that are existing within the community and that we are working with. So I think we need to strengthen that. And yeah, I'm going to lie.
And the other thing is that I think we've done this even in POF1, and it's now moving on to POF2, where traditionally you will see agencies designing the whole programs in Juba or whatever, and then take it to the community. But the fact that we go to the community and the community actually are the one says that these are our needs, this is the support we need. I think it makes it, there is a power in that in terms of the ownership as well. And from that point, the moment the community brings something and say, look, we have an issue here, we want your support, then straight away a question is asked and say, okay, we work together. This is what is required for this particular dialogue. For example, if it's a peace dialogue. And within that, this is the budget. And now, what are you contributing? See, it can work quite well in that sense for POF, especially with our approach that the activities or whatever needed, the intervention comes from the community. So it's easy enough for us. We just need to keep pushing harder and broad and just sort of expand the conversation. But a lot of work we really need to focus. Traditionally, we really need to come back and focus on the chiefs because they are the key in terms of sustainability, because they play a major role. If we get the chiefs to understand that we need to go back to how we used to live, I think we could get going very quickly.
And maybe the third side of that triangle is the livelihoods. And even in the conversation earlier today, discussing how if you have support for some of these structures that also is around sustainable livelihoods that they can get some of the benefit on from, rather, then that creates a little bit of a resource that can continue over time for some of the smaller needs that are there from day to day in terms of engaging with the piece. So we can perhaps continue this conversation and maybe get someone else in who's worked on a completely different program trying to address this. But often I think these exit strategies, at the end of the day, they boil down to, it's called strategy, but it boils down to, when are we going to tell the community that we're leaving, rather than anything actually fundamentally strategic. For anyone who wants to read a little more about the Pakam Lanjang and that ownership that grew through that's in a blog by Minagano on the website. And otherwise, we'll be back for the next episode on the next theme. I don't know what that'll be.
Yes.
And we'll pick up sustainability in due course with a guest. Thank you, folks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That was a great conversation. You can cut that one out.
And that was a great conversation.